Gallaway could not join us today, but we'll still be covering her experience in embedded librarianship. So embedded librarianship, just a basic definition, involves integrating a librarian into the environment of the user. So really putting the librarian into the classroom, whether that's online or in person. And we're here at Loyola University New Orleans, and if you don't know about our school, we're a private Jesuit Catholic institution. We have approximately 5,000 students enrolled, and many of the images you see today are from the Loyola University New Orleans photographs collection, which is actually hosted by Lewis. A little bit about our instruction program. We have 10 librarians in our instruction program. They're all of our members of the library faculty who are librarians, and we each specialize in different liaison areas, which are different areas of studies. We do approximately 230 individual instruction sessions a year, so those are something like one-shots. We also teach an elective course, Research in Technology 2.0. That's an 8-week online course. And we've been involved in several embedded experiences and also co-taught several courses, so we're just going to highlight a few of those experiences for you today. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Teri Gallaway's experience with the class Interdisciplinary Humanities Research. Teri is our interim director of public services. She is our liaison to criminal justice, sociology, and many other departments, including the honors program. In the spring of 2012, she co-taught with the director of the honors program, Naomi Yavne, this course, Interdisciplinary Humanities Research. The theme of the course was 1912 in context. Now, 2012 was a really big year for Loyola because that was our centennial year. So the aim of this class was really to connect with Loyola 100 years ago. So they wanted to learn about the 1912 time period. The goals of the course were to make a kind of lab experience. So here you see an animal, a creature being dissected. Might be a rabbit. The other goal was to also connect with history 100 years ago. So really putting things in context, as the title of the course suggests. The first kind of project that the students worked on was a mini presentation of the student's choice. And they had to choose a topic from 100 years ago. And the thing that they had to include in their presentation was historical newspapers. Here at Loyola, we have access to the Times-Picayune and the New York Times. So students had to incorporate those resources into their mini presentation. So there were 3 big assignments for the course. I already described one, the mini presentations. The other 2 were digital exhibits and research apprenticeships. So next I'm going to talk about the digital exhibit assignment. They had to put some sort of exhibit in a digital format. The 3 topics the students had to choose from were the Loyola Centennial, of course, but the other centennial going on was the centennial of the Girl Scouts, so they could choose that topic if they wanted. And the other centennial was actually a bicentennial. There was the Louisiana Bicentennial celebration also going on. Now, a sub-component of the course was an optional service learning component. And this was a really neat opportunity because it allowed Teri to draw from her librarian experience of organizing information. So the service learning opportunity was to work with a local chapter of the Girl Scouts. And they had a whole closet through of materials that were mostly costumes, well, not costumes, the uniforms for the Girl Scouts, and also various memorabilia. And it really didn't have much of an organization, so they all worked together to organize those materials and really drew upon Teri's expertise as a librarian. The last component of the course was a research apprenticeship piece. And here the students were paired with professors from across the campus to provide research expertise and assistance. And I believe even our the president of our school got involved with this. So the students paired up with different professors from across the university, and they provided research help. And the professors were really pleased with the experience. And I know I can't provide a lot of detail about this because Teri's not here today. So if you do have questions about this, Teri's contact information will be at the end of the slideshow, so you can feel free to email her and she'd be happy to answer any specific questions, or if we can answer it, we'll try, about the honors embedded experience. But next up is Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you, Malia. My name is Elizabeth Kelly, and I am the Digital Initiatives Librarian at Loyola University. The class that I work with is called Intro to Music Industry Studies, and unlike most of the other classes you're going to hear about today, I did not set up the embedded experience with this course. It predates my work at Loyola. The head of the Music Industry Studies Department, John Snyder, approached the instruction coordinator / music librarian, Alicia Hansen, shortly after he started working here, because he found that the students in this intro class were unfamiliar with basic research and technology skills. He found that they were relying too heavily on unreliable sources, and they were intentionally and unintentionally plagiarizing. They did not understand that they had to credit info that they found freely on the internet, and so John asked Alicia to work with the class, and he found that their semester projects greatly improved after she became involved. So after that, Malia worked with the class, as did Teri, and they made some changes to it over time, and I started working with the class in 2011. I do have a background in music composition, not in music business, but I did find that some of my background was applicable to working with this class. Generally, though, this class is really good for anybody who's got experience with intro to library instruction. And I've also since taken over music industry studies as a liaison area. The way the class works is it meets Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 50 minutes. On Mondays and Wednesdays, they meet with music industry faculty, and on Fridays, they meet with the librarian who's associated with the course. The goal of the course is to provide students with an overview of the music industry and a chance to try out different jobs within the music industry. So they get to see what it's like to work in marketing, in creative services, in finance, in legal, and in management. Their final project in the class is to create a production company with several of their classmates, and they have to produce music for an artist. They have to put on a concert with that artist, create a music video, create a website, and sell merchandise. In addition to making all of those deliverables, they have to write detailed business plans for each of the deliverables. Research, it counts for 20% of the grade for that final project. So besides writing the business plan, they have to show that they did some research before deciding what to do. In my portion of the class, when they meet with me on Fridays, we talk about research and technology. We learn how to evaluate information sources, use the library's resources for research, avoid plagiarism, MLA citations, web presence, and social media best practices, and we do some technology instruction with WordPress and Excel. And I also create my own assignments for them, which also are 20% of their grade for the class. Since the course initially started working with a librarian, we've made quite a few changes over time. We do a lot less emphasis on Microsoft Office than when the course first started, and more emphasis on active learning. We talk about best practices rather than how to use software. So we talk about presentation best practices instead of how to use PowerPoint, for example. When Teri and Malia started working with the class, they created online tutorials of database research to put in Blackboard, which is our course management system, so that they could spend more hands-on time in class. The students were able to watch the videos before class. And they also introduced peer editing. We collect student feedback to inform every semester, and the feedback is generally very positive, and I do use it to make changes each semester. The final project has also changed over time. Originally, the final project for the class was a typical research paper, whereas now the final project actually lets them experience what it's like to be in the music industry. We also incorporated web presence and social media best practices after the faculty asked us to teach the students how to define their audience. So we work with them to create a website using WordPress and then use social media to promote themselves. We've also changed the schedule of the class. Originally, they met with a librarian for the first 10 Fridays of every semester, but we found that what was happening is by the end of the semester, they had forgot a lot of what we had talked about and were not prepared to do research for their final project. So now we do every other Friday for a total of 8 classes and have found that they're better prepared now. Some tools that I use in the class include Blackboard, our course management software. We create our own Blackboard course just for the research portion of the class, so our assignments and course materials are kept separate from the music industry professors' materials. We also have the tutorials, which are embedded in Blackboard and also available through the library website. I use grading rubrics for each of their assignments, which helps me with the grading and also helps the students to know exactly what is expected of them with the assignments. And we use research guides to help them know what resources to use. Some advantages to being an embedded librarian with this class are that the students get to know quite a few librarians by name and face every semester. Besides the librarian who is assigned to work with the class, which is right now myself, I usually bring in a few guest librarians each semester as well, so they may get to know up to 4 librarians in different areas, some of whom they may also get to see in other classes. We also get to introduce students to library research their very first semester of college. We know what assignments the students will be asking for help with. We're able to inform and aid the faculty in developing alternative research assignments. And it gives the librarian working with the class experience developing and assessing their own assignments. There are, of course, some challenges as well to working with this class. The biggest is probably the time commitment. The first semester I worked with this class, I was spending about 12 hours a week just preparing for the class. Now that I've worked for several semesters, it doesn't take me nearly that long. But it is time consuming. You do spend a lot of time answering student emails. It can also be challenging communicating and coordinating with the music industry faculty. We try and set up the schedule so that the Friday research and technology classes reflect what was taught on Monday and Wednesday by the music industry faculty, but that doesn't always work. It has improved over time with the 8-week every other schedule, but there's still room for improvement. There is often confusion from the students about who is teaching what. They will often come to the librarian with questions about the final project that really need to be answered by the music industry faculty. And it can be tough to make sure that they're getting all the information they need. And finally, the biggest complaint that happens every semester on the student feedback form is that the students don't see how the research portion of the class actually ties into their final project. Part of this may be because they turn in their feedback forms for me several weeks before the project is actually due. This semester, they actually turned in those feedback forms just a week and a half before the project was due, and I did find that fewer of them were unable to see the connection, but there were still a few. So every semester I work at trying to make it more obvious why we're doing this and how it feeds into that final project. So thank you very much, and now I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Brian Sullivan, and I'm the Research and Instructional Technologies Librarian here at the university, Loyola University New Orleans, and I'm also the liaison to English, Religious Studies, Philosophy, and our ministry program. So I'm going to be talking about the class, the Synoptic Gospels, that I was an embedded librarian in. Oops, wrong slide. So just a little background on how I became involved with this course. I became the religious studies liaison in my first semester here at Loyola, but without any background in religious studies. I hadn't taken a class or ever actually been interested in religious studies. But it worked out that I had a really good working relationship with one of the new biblical studies professors. I taught a number of one-shot sessions for her, and she really enjoyed the work that I had done, and that she saw that her students definitely benefited from these one-shot sessions. So we were meeting to discuss a completely different project that we were working on together, and it came in across that I told her that I would like to get more religious studies background and more subject knowledge so I could be a better library liaison. And then she told me that I could just come to her class next semester. This was in spring of 2011, and then I suggested that we actually try out an embedded librarian model for this class. So I was just going to come, and then we were going to do some library stuff related to it and throughout the class. But we had this eureka moment because we were working on recording a tutorial for a book on the Synoptic Gospels that's difficult to use. It's not an intuitive book to use because what it does is compare the different Synoptic Gospels side by side. So we were creating a tutorial for students so they could use it effectively in the course. So we had a eureka moment to use the software Camtasia to actually make an assignment for the class. So I wanted to give you a little background about the course. This course was a majors course, or majors or minors course, and it had 12 religious studies majors and minors in it. And these ranged from freshman students who were in their second semester at Loyola to seniors who were going to be graduating in 3 months. So we had a very nice diversity. We even had a nun who was, I believe she was in her mid-70s at the time. She was on sabbatical for a semester taking classes here. So we had a very, very diverse class. This class was set up as a seminar style inside the library. So we have seminar rooms within the library, and we would meet round seminar style tables, and then it was a discussion-based course. And one of the things about this course, since I was in there, and what we really tried to do, as I mentioned before, was incorporate library research and resources in the day-to-day aspects of the class. So if someone had brought up a question, we would send them out to the stacks to grab a reference book for biblical commentaries, or we would send them up to the actual stacks, not the reference stacks, and look for criticism so they could find resources for discussion while we were in the library, which was one of the important parts of having the course in the library, was to incorporate that library and research element. So, and then finally, this course covered just the first 3 books of the Christian Bible, and we actually went in a different order, in case you were wondering. We went Mark, Matthew, Luke, rather than Matthew, Mark, and then Luke. So, to talk a little bit about the Camtasia projects, these projects were spurned out, like I said, out of building a tutorial for the class, saying that, well, this would be a really interesting way for students to engage in critical biblical study without having to write a lot of papers or do a lot of writings, and it would be a different way to approach it. So what the requirements for this, what we basically had for requirements was you had to use Camtasia, you had to visually interpret a passage from the Bible using a critical lens, and that could be historical criticism, rhetorical criticism, feminist criticism, post-colonial criticism, any sort of biblical method. But you had to choose one, and you had to choose one verse. And we had 4 groups of 3 students, so I said that it was a diverse class. So we had groups with one group that had a second semester freshman, a junior, and a nun in it. So we had very diverse groups working together, so that was very interesting. And then, like I said, they had to visually interpret the gospel in their exegesis. They have to, with appropriate images or videos or things along those lines. And then on top of that, so it was less than 5 minutes, so the class had to, so we avoided any underprepared or too long presentations. I think that we've all been in a class where students, you've said you have a 10-minute presentation, and then the student gets up and says, well, I don't have a lot to say, so I don't know if I'm going to make it for 10 minutes. And then 40 minutes later, you're like, okay, I thought you didn't have much to say, and now class is over. So we had 5 minutes, and then we had the group lead a class discussion. And before the class discussion, they had to get assigned their classmates reading, and they had discussion questions, which they had to prepare and be prepared to lead the class in that discussion. And it really worked surprisingly well. We thought it would work well, and we thought it would be a good project and be interesting. But the first one that came out of this was just the first presentation, and this was given over a month, so it wasn't every class we had this. So over a period of time, the students would present on their different verses, and the students just brought this incredible creativity with them and this incredible enthusiasm to the discussion and to the assignment that really helped project, helped the momentum of the class move forward even more. And this was then these skills that they learned for interpreting and research and things along those lines were reinterpreted were reapplied during a final paper. So it wasn't like this was like a class where we were like, well, we're throwing writing out the window, but instead we use this as an opportunity for students to practice skills together, to work together, and then to apply them later in the class. And I will say the professor gave me the papers before she graded them and said, read these. I'm not going to get to them yet, so I want you to take a look at them. And they were fantastic, and I told her that they were fantastic, and she gave me a suspicious, we'll see. And then she came back to me the next day and was like, these were absolutely phenomenal papers. And I really, really think that the Camtasia projects reinforce those skills to give them the opportunity to reapply and then do a really good job on these. And this picture is a picture of a student's Camtasia project, and you can see how much goes into interpreting and aligning and putting these together. So some of the benefits of this project, this class and working together, is the projects got us out of the only written work paradigm in teaching, that we are allowed students creativity and playfulness and to then be in charge of the class, which was really a good experience for them. So that was a really nice, and this wouldn't have worked if I wasn't in the class because the professor didn't have the knowledge of Camtasia. So having me there and having me teach the students and act as a technological backup really worked. The other thing that worked is that a couple of times the professor was really sick and was unable to run the class, but she trusted me enough to run class discussion or to run a test review with the students. And they worked out really well for me to be in there. So it wasn't students trying to police students, but also the students saw me as a leader in the class, that if I was there, class was still happening. And this gets into, I think, a very important point with embedded classes, that librarians, at least in my case in this class, we operate in this in-between space, and I think this can be applied across our work. And one student very aptly put that in a presentation we did on campus, that it was like Brian, was more than a professor, but I definitely wasn't a student. More than a student, but I wasn't a professor, sorry. So I wasn't in charge of grading. Students didn't have to worry about feeling stupid in front of me or me having so much knowledge about religious studies that I would just cut down any arguments that they had. So I was able to also encourage lively debate, and that got into a really interesting times when the professor was like, they don't seem to disagree with each other, want to disagree with each other, even though they obviously do, because we're talking about religion and that's a very personal topic. So I would just take the devil's advocate of whatever anyone was saying and really push it from a polite discussion into a debate about the material to get the students starting to think and defend their positions. And that worked really well. Whereas if the professor tried to do that, the discussion would often shut down because they would say, well, the professor said it and she's right, so that's end of the discussion. And then finally, I actually edited papers for students if they asked, and the papers that I edited for the students all ended up being A's, which was a really good experience for me and for them. So the other class I want to talk to you about is Intro to Film and Digital Media. Now this course is the introduction course for the Film and Digital Media concentration for English majors at Loyola. And this is the only required course for that major. So they have to take this course and then They have a bunch of other courses that they're allowed to take depending on what track they want to go with. And it could be film, it could be website building, things along those lines. Now, I had worked with the professor before on a number of classes, including a previous iteration in this class, but it was not as heavy. I more just showed up as technical backup in case students, for workshop days, in case students needed some extra help and this professor couldn't get to everyone on time. Now, when we got to, the previous course focused on early photography, but this was before I came into it. It focused on early photography and film, and then made a really sharp transition to television, which was a bit jarring for television and digital media, which was a bit jarring for students, that it was like history, history, history. Okay, now we're talking about something totally different. And the professor approached me about this, saying that he really needed more time spent on technical skills for them to complete the projects that he was hoping that they would work on. So we looked at the course together and redesigned it to engage with media theorists by creating digital objects that do critical work. And this was inspired by the concept of Patricia, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. The professor encouraged them for me to edit their papers. Anyway, so back to Introduction to Film and Digital Media. The concept of carpentry is inspired by the book by Ian Bogost, Alien Phenomenology, or What It's Like to Be a Thing. And carpentry is focused on making objects, digital or otherwise, that do philosophy rather than just writing about them. So to put it in other words, in actually Ian Bogost' words, ways that theory and philosophy can take form in constructed artifacts in addition to or instead of written argument. So through this concept, we wanted students to critically reflect on the material they were reading through the projects they were creating. So the projects took a variety of forms, and here are a couple examples here. So based on my experience with Synoptic Gospels, students created Camtasia videos, analyzing aspects of James Aggie's and Walker Evans' Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. We used Prezi to visually map arguments from Wayman Williams' book Television. Students updated Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Massage as a Tumblr, which provided some really interesting results. We also created animated GIFs for one of our theorists interacting with characters from the webcomic Homestuck. And we applied everything that they've learned throughout the semester from theorists, and we had them apply that to House of Leaves. And so there's a lot of interesting projects that came out of this, and a lot of projects that were very big successes, some that we could have designed better, but I'll get to that in the changes. So for changes for the future, what we realized is we were very ambitious with this course, but we found we had in the future iterations, we want to do less breadth and more depth to the course. So more engagement with specific media theorists for longer periods of time. We also wanted less projects worth more within the grading scheme. So students would really engage rather than, we had pretty much a project per week. So what we wanted to do is have students engage in a couple of weeks for them to really dive into a project. And then finally, we're going to have students start working on the projects very early in the class. I went to the ACRL's technology immersion this summer, and my project for that class was a redesign of this class, especially the opening couple weeks, saying that we need to get students into making these carpentry digital objects right away so they understand what's expected of them as the class goes on. And with that, I'll turn it over to Malia with historical methods.
So I am Malia Willey. I'm the instruction coordinator here at Loyola. I'm the liaison to Mass Comm, African and African American Studies, Asian Studies, and Middle East Peace Studies. And for this particular discussion, it's important to emphasize that I'm liaison to the History Department. Historical Methods is an introductory course required of all history majors, so most of the students are freshmen and sophomores. The course is taught by various faculty members of the History Department. It's a 1-credit lab course. It typically meets for 50 minutes a week. Sometimes it's met for an hour and 15 minutes a week, depending on what day it's taught. And it really teaches students the basics of being a history major. So this involves how to read primary and secondary sources, how to do research, how to do citation, how to edit drafts of papers, and also the ethics of being a historian, including plagiarism, but also other ideas of how you represent information in a historical aspect. This course is linked with another course, History A200, which at Loyola is U.S. History to 1865. And the reason they're linked is primarily two reasons. It brings the students together in a lab experience. So the content part of the course happens in A200, and then the lab allows the students to kind of workshop their final paper for that course. So it brings all the history majors together. Previously, I had worked with this course beginning in 2009, and before I came to Loyola, we had a long-standing history liaison. He also had a background in history, and he had really been involved with collection development, but not so much with library instruction. When I came to Loyola, I had come from Indiana University, where I had an interim position as a history subject librarian. So I had some experience working with history courses, and I also have a master's degree in history in addition to an MLS. So there was a lot of interest from the history faculty here because I had subject expertise and experience in both history and research. So in 2009 and 2010, I provided one shot basically for this course. I would do an overview of library resources for history majors. It was always a bit daunting because it seemed like I wanted to cover everything and they wanted me to cover everything that a history major could possibly want to know in one period. And in 2011, we kind of expanded that to include a workshop class, which was nice because then I could do the content in one shot, and then I had a second one shot to follow up with the students to make sure they actually knew how to apply using all that I showed them. So it was a bit more best practices and a bit less daunting than trying to do everything in one session. Well, before 2012, I met with the professor who was teaching the course in the fall, Dr. Mark Fernandez, and he approached me and asked if I wanted to be more involved in the class. And I had worked with him a lot with his other courses. One of the things he is known to do is have the students turn in annotated bibliography of their assignment ahead of time so he can see how much research they've done. And usually I do a drop-in session for his classes. And what he does is if he looks at that annotated bibliography and he feels the student needs additional help, he'll write "See Malia" at the top. So I've met with a lot of his students individually, which has been a good way for me to follow up with students who need more help. And I've also made a lot of online research guides. Throughout that time period between 2009 and 2012, we were able to get the LibGuides platform, which has been really awesome for history because a lot of the resources that we like to use are linked outside of our own homepage. So it was a good way to integrate new sources into his courses. So we'd work together a lot. And in our conversation, looking over the goals of the course, when I read them, a lot of them are very librarian-centric. So citation, research, looking at different resources. So we just decided it would probably be helpful for me to be there every class period. So the obvious change that occurred is instead of just coming in once or twice, now I was an embedded librarian every week. And we revised the syllabus together. He enrolled me as an instructor in their Blackboard course. So I could post readings, I could see where they were at with different things. And each week we met to prepare for the class. So it's a bit more time consuming than a normal one-shot arrangement because we did meet every week to plan what we wanted to do for that week. We kept in those library introduction days, but they were a lot more slow-paced because we could cover topics over time and we could add in more kind of formative assessments instead of trying to fit in all the content in one day. We also had research workshop days still, but there were a lot more opportunities to talk about research throughout the semester. So basically we would co-lecture on each topic, and sometimes he would take the lead, sometimes I would take the lead. So for an example, we taught citation managers. Usually I would just mention citations, but this time we were able to have a presentation, and in fact Brian came in and talked about Zotero. We had someone from the WAC lab, which is our writing across the curriculum, come in and talk about citation style, in particular Chicago. And so it was much more collaborative. We also looked at book reviews. Students often struggle with reading historical monographs, and previously I might just mention like, hey, there are book reviews in JSTOR, and you might check those out because they're a good way to familiarize yourself with a work. Well, now we could more leisurely show how to look up book reviews, and we could also talk about how you would strategically actually read a monograph. So looking at the introduction, reading a book review, using the index, strategically skimming. So those were kind of more involved and helped the students figure out what they needed to do. So one of the websites we found really helpful was Do History. This is a website based upon Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's Pulitzer Prize-winning Midwife's Tale, The Life of Martha Ballard, 1785 to 1812, which is a very excellent monograph. And it's a really useful website based upon the book because it allows historians to see how different resources are used to create a narrative. And so they have different examples of historical accounts that conflict and how a historian would go through the process of looking at those and creating a narrative around conflicting resources. And they also show different primary sources. One of the things the students found very fun was they had different letters written in crosshatch, which is where you would write across the page horizontally and then vertically to save space. So students could see what it's like looking at actual primary sources and how daunting it can be to read the old scripts. And we also used a resource they have on how to read a primary source, which was very helpful. So looking at how would you see who the author is. Things we're very familiar with, how to evaluate a resource, but in this specific context, how you would evaluate a historical resource. So there were several benefits to this collaboration. The course reviews afterwards were very favorable. The other thing that was really nice is the students got to see two historians have scholarly debate. So Brian was kind of talking about how students often don't want to disagree with each other. Well, the students found it very interesting that the professor and I didn't always agree on specific topics. So we kind of have different philosophies of history that we are more akin to. So we'd sometimes disagree on how you'd interpret a particular topic or who was the preeminent historian on a specific topic. The thing that I really enjoyed is the students got to know me, and since then they have sought me out. So it's really nice to have a face and a name with every new history major. So it's great that I can see them now and they feel comfortable meeting up with me. The other thing that was really nice is this set a baseline for all of the history majors. So now I know what they know, and it's really easy to build upon that. The other nice thing was it provided a good foundation for when they do research later on. So some of the students do select a thesis option, and if they select that thesis option, I know that they have a foundation in research, and I can just add upon how other resources would specifically apply to their topic. The other thing that was really helpful is I found that students ended up inviting me to student activities that I'd never been invited to before, like student pizza parties. The other thing that was interesting is because we gave a presentation on this with our Center for Faculty Innovation, I found that other professors were intrigued and they wanted to work with me, so I ended up working with more history faculty. And also that I found that the department wanted to involve me more in discussions of curricular decisions. So in the future, after the course, I talked with the professor and we decided that we would have several kind of changes if we were to work together again in the future. We'd like more time with the research materials, so we found that it would be better to keep breaking up things even further over the semester so students have enough time to learn the resources and materials. We also found that we would like to incorporate me more into the assessments. So the professor was really happy with that because he thought, ooh, help grading. But I was kind of thinking of using more rubrics like we had used in music industry to kind of chart information literacy learning. One of the things that's still unclear to me is how I'm going to scaffold other learning outcomes throughout the rest of the major. There are no other required courses. Well, there are required courses, but they're amongst geographical locations, so the students don't have to take their courses in any particular order. They just need to take them in a particular geography. So it's a bit complicated to figure out how to scaffold further learning outcomes throughout the major before they graduate. One of the things the professor was concerned with was that my workload would be overwhelmed, and one of the things that was very helpful for me is our faculty has been really supportive of us working in these embedded experiences. So it's been considered a valuable thing to do throughout our promotion and tenure process. So it's work that's really valued. So it was good to know that this was where my colleagues wanted me to invest my time. And it also made the professor more comfortable because he knew he wasn't taking up too much of my time, and this was in fact something that we truly value as librarians, as educators, and we plan to work together more in the future. So that kind of concludes us talking. We're curious to see if you have any questions for us. Again, if you have specific questions for Teri, we'll do our best to answer them, but you can always contact Teri. You have her email there on the screen.
So, Patricia, I just want to address your question a little bit more. And Malia, I think, said this really well, is that once you get to know students, they seek you out more. So the professor, students asked, the students were required to have their papers edited by our writing across the curriculum department. And one student asked if I could edit the paper, and the professor didn't want to overwhelm me with work, the same way Malia's colleague didn't want to overwhelm her. But I said that I would be fine because there was only 12 of them. So I looked at the papers, but I warned them ahead of time that I'm not very nice when I edit, especially if there's for students. So one student that didn't even ask this asked if I'd look at his paper, and I gave it back to him, dripping red, and he brought it back to me, and we went through 3 rounds where I kept telling him to adjust or explain or expand things. And then he came to me the rest of his time at Loyola, even to edit his graduate school applications and his applications for the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. So it was a really great way to build a relationship with students. So.
And Brian says edited, but I think another way of saying it is feedback.
Yeah, it's proofreading.
So here's
not proofreading.
Not proofreading, like less grammar emphasis and more like, oh, have you considered this reading or something like that, where he was getting involved with more of the content, content suggestions, I guess.
Right. I'd say, this is logical. This is not a logical jump. Explain what you mean, or expand this point more. Or this sentence, and Malia's right. I wouldn't just correct grammar. It was more along the lines of, this sentence doesn't make sense. Fix it. Like I said, I'm not very nice when I edit. Any other questions? Thoughts?
We see someone's typing, so we'll take a pause.
So we'll all look at your typing.
I guess why questions are coming in. Another course that we've been working with is a first-year seminar for professional and continuing studies. And we co-teach that class, so it's similar to embedded, but we're actually the instructor of record, and that's been interesting because it's been hybrid. Some of the students are online, so it's been really useful for us to be there. Brian co-taught that class for 2 semesters, and it's been really helpful for us to provide support in the digital environment. So if you are teaching online, keep in mind, embedded can work both in person and online. So I think this question is for Elizabeth.
So I have a question from LSU Middleton Library about what, I think the question is, what did the music industry class do on the Fridays when they did not meet with me? And that's a good question. Once we started going to the every other Friday, what they were supposed to do is on Fridays work on that group project. It's supposed to be kind of open lab time with the music industry professor, but just to focus on that final project since there were so many components towards it. But I think that what they found is that they were not getting through the course content on Mondays and Wednesdays as quickly as they thought, and they wound up kind of spilling over onto Fridays. So I just met with the faculty member the other day, and he said next semester he wants to make sure that those Fridays when I'm not there are just dedicated towards that group project. So they still have class. They meet with that music industry professor. It's just not me.
So Jeremiah has a question. He's from UL Lafayette. I feel there is some hesitancy among faculty to come asking the library for help. To what extent did the faculty embrace your ideas, or did you have to sort of sell them on the embedded librarian thing? I think it's really varied. A lot of the relationships here are personalized, which can be good, but also is kind of a struggle, right? Because if you develop this relationship with one professor, if the professor changes, you're not necessarily involved with the class next semester. So it's really varied. I know Professor Teri worked with Naomi Yavne. She had worked with a librarian a lot at her previous institution. So she came to Loyola with the expectations a librarian would want to collaborate with her. So it was a natural fit. Music industry, like Elizabeth described, developed over time, and it's been a relationship that's kind of switched hands. I think everyone in this room, Brian, Elizabeth, and myself, and even Teri, have all worked with this class. So it's something that he valued. The other relationships, I think, have been, I talked about the history department, how the relationship varied over time, how it used to be mostly collection development. I think part of it was them just not knowing librarians offered this type of help. So it was me getting to know them in their other classes and then us expanding. And I think for Brian, a big asset has been his knowledge of technology, and I think that's been really your kind of in with all of these classes. If you want to talk about that.
For the Synoptic Gospels class, as I discussed. I mean, the professor and I had been working together since 2009, and we've had a very good friendship and like professional friendship and working relationship. So I mean, she had realized very early on here that students didn't know how to do biblical research, and I just happened to be the one to volunteer for the one shot that she requested. So it worked out well that she saw that I was very eager to learn and very eager to be to give a good one shot and do good research and help with the class. And then the technology thing it developed over time. So it was just a natural progression. And now, I mean, she can just say, "Come to my class, I need this," and I can walk in very easily and know exactly what she wants from a session, whether it be research or technology. For the Intro to Film and Digital Media, before the professor I worked with came, I had no idea that that was even a concentration here, even though I had worked with English a lot. But I think that my reputation with doing smaller projects in English and across campus with technology, when he arrived, I had actually met him on his interview just by chance, but when he was coming here, when he moved to New Orleans and was getting set up, he met with me to talk about technology on campus and technological things. So I think it was very, very much my reputation with technology, and that he was willing and wanted to work in some sort of capacity with technological projects. There was a couple iterations that we discussed before I ended up working as an embedded librarian in the class. We were actually originally wanted to do a 1-credit lab where it would be informed by the content of the Intro to Film and Digital Media class, but it would just be workshop and technological demonstration and then workshop for the students. But that the department was unwilling to add more credits to the requirement, which I can understand, more required credits or something that hadn't been tested or approved yet.
So the other thing we've kind of found at this point too is it is kind of known that we do these type of things, and we kind of need to strategically pick where we do these things, because there are only 10 of us librarians. So I mean, how many of these embedded experiences can we do, and want to make sure we're doing them in the right places. And one of the things that we actually worked for to institutionalize was to co-teach the first year seminars for professional and continuing studies each semester. So that was something that we worked on at a committee level to get approved, which has been good, because then it's not a matter of negotiating with the professor each semester. It's kind of known we'll work with that course. And so we have another question from LSU Middleton. How much time was spent teaching the technology?
Well, we're in a both lucky and unlucky situation in this class that we met for 3 hours, 3 hours once a week. So we were able to split the time between content, technology, teaching, and then workshop. I'm a very hands-off technology teacher. Because I think that I can bring you, my perspective at the moment anyway, is that you can bring someone through all the technical aspects and how to push every button correctly, but it's not until they get into the actual making of the project that they really need to figure it out. So I usually I try to do less than 15 minutes of demonstration. More for like Tumblr or Prezi, most of the time was spent signing up. For Camtasia, I was just showing them the basics of what you can do with Camtasia and then letting them go out on their own. So, and the other thing is, I think that if we spend a lot of time, I've noticed that if I spend a lot of time crafting like how to do one thing in a technological format, it stifles the creativity, where we're building the class and these projects around experimentation and being almost playful with what they could do with these projects to see what would come out of it. So not too much time. Next time I would probably spend the same amount of time during class teaching technology. I would just start it a lot earlier.
Another thing that we're piloting right now is a lynda.com kiosk. And if you're not familiar with Lynda, it's a subscription service, and they provide tutorials to all sorts of technology. So in fact, music industry sponsored a kiosk for us. So I mean, that's another possibility for teaching technology, because you'll find some students really just like to dig in, or other students already know how to use it. So Lynda seems like it's going to be a really nice resource for students who need more of that kind of like point and click instruction, as opposed to spending class time on it. Any other questions? Well, it looks like we're all out of questions, but feel free to email us if you think of something later. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah.
Have a great Friday.
Oh, and just to mention, all of the images we have were used under Creative Commons licenses, so we have image credits.
And lots of them are from the Louisiana Digital Library.
Hosted by Lewis.
Thank you for your participation today. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.